What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another edition of the Jays for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh. We got Jay's Jumpers, Jaron Jackson Jr.'s, John Morant's, Joe Johnson's, Ja Raffs, of course. We've got Jays. We got him for days. Josh, how you doing?
I was going to try and see if we could come up with a fun Masters trivia fact about the last J person to win, and then I realized Jordan Spieth had won fairly recently, and then it wasn't so fun anymore, so I didn't actually do it. I was hoping we could go. I was going to be able to ask you the last time somebody whose name started with a J, and it was 1983 or something.
Well, if we're going first name, then yeah, we'd have to go back to Spieth. There's also Dustin Johnson, like 2 years ago, if we're counting last names.
I kind of think that's cheating, but
okay, all right, that's fair. I mean, I'm not opposed to that. But this is also a podcast where if we are trying to put somebody in the
yes,
intro, that we'll go to the middle name. That we go to the middle name. So
absolutely.
I hesitate to call it cheating, but I get it.
We set the rules. The rules are dependent on the situation.
That's exactly
and they change.
Right. That's exactly right. Like all rules in a functioning society.
Correct.
We set the rules subjectively, and they change whenever we want them to. Right?
Yes.
That's how
to
it
fit
works.
our needs.
Okay. Perfect. So I was pretty sure that's how it works. Glad we're on the same page. Yes. We are post Masters. We're post Jim Nance week. We are post rain delays, and we are post John Rahm winning the Masters. So happy Masters Monday. It's the saddest day of the year because there are 361 days until the next Masters round, and that is just sad.
Do you see what Rob said about Zach Ertz?
Yes, I did. That's so good. And did you see that? So apparently Zach Ertz sent it in a group chat that also includes JJ Watt.
JJ Watt, yeah.
Which is also elite. Imagine just being on vacation because Rahm lives in Arizona, and which checks out considering I don't know if Ertz lives in Arizona in the offseason. It wouldn't stun me if he does, but right, JJ Watt being a Arizona Cardinal, or at least was an Arizona Cardinal, it certainly makes sense that they'd all be out there together. But yes, seeing the screenshots and the evidence is laugh out loud funny.
Yeah, I love how JJ Watt just came out and said, "Yeah, I can verify this. Here you go."
I loved during his green jacket speech for like 3 seconds he was he kind of stumbled over his words. John did when he was going to bring it up. So he had this moment of, and I'm going to say his name, and I'm like, oh my gosh, who could it possibly be? And I don't know who I was expecting it to be. It probably wasn't Zach Ertz, but still an entertaining nonetheless little anecdote from the beginning of a week in which John Rahm won by 4 strokes and spotted the field a double bogey and a 4-putt on the first hole. Not a bad performance.
Yeah, we really need to talk more about how much better he was than everybody else for the final 71 holes.
Yes, that's correct. That's correct. And not to mention the fact that he shot 65 on Friday. He shot 65.
Right.
He birdied 9 of his next 17 holes.
Yeah.
After his double. Not a bad day at the office. We're now a week post UConn cutting down the nets in the Final Four, and we've spent plenty of time talking about that in the last week. But it's time to go. It's time to go see where we were inevitably wrong.
And where we were right.
And that is fair. There were some right turns, if you will, at the beginning of the year when we did our big preseason predictions podcast, and there were some places that we strayed off the correct path. But we're gonna take a look back in this pod, and while also making some picks in terms of our postseason hindsight 2020 picks, where we get to use the whole season as evidence of these picks rather than predicting what might happen. So we're going to kind of bounce back and forth between the predictions we made at the beginning of the year and also offer up new picks for things that might need them. Of course, we're not going to make our number 1 seed and Final Four picks again because that would be silly. We knocked that out of the park, I'm confident. But we will make new first-team All-America picks. The Colin Gillespie first-team All-Important team, which is easily my favorite team.
Absolutely.
As well as National Player of the Year and Coach of the Year. Let's start, Josh. Let's quickly run through where we went with our conference predictions. Try to get a scope of what we thought the college basketball world might look like before this season started and where it actually ended up. So let's start with conferences briefly. We'll go in alphabetical order like we always do, and that means starting with the ACC. Josh, who roughly 6 months ago, roughly 6 months ago, did you pick to win the ACC?
North Carolina.
No. What?
I feel like, didn't we both kind of say Virginia's going to make it close, but neither of us actually had the courage to pick them?
You know what? There's a small part of me that thinks I picked that I picked Virginia. Hold on. There's a whole lot of podcast notes scrolling, but yes. North Carolina, whether I picked Virginia or not, North Carolina was the answer to this question preseason.
Yeah. There's not too much to say about that one.
Very much not so. I did in fact pick North Carolina. I think I did. There was a whole lot of discussion about I don't know.
Neither of us could do it. We were. I was a North Carolina skeptic, but not to the extent that I thought they would be bad. So, yeah, we just move on from that one.
We'll just move on. As will the rest of the country, because everybody else got that one wrong. Everyone else did. Alrighty, moving right along to the Big East.
Picked Creighton. I won't apologize for it. It was incorrect, but I still feel fine about it. I don't regret it.
And I still think there's a world in which, Creighton finishes 14-6, right? Marquette 17-3. So there's a world in which Ryan Cockburner is healthy that they don't win 17 anyways. But I'll stick by that one. I'm here for that. I'll go down with the Creighton ship in terms of the Big East regular season title. National champion UConn, by the way, finished 13-7 in the conference.
Yeah.
Whatever. But also at the end of the national championship, you're like, okay, okay, I'll take it.
Yeah.
Okay. Big 12.
You picked Creighton?
I did. I picked Creighton.
Oh, okay.
Who did you think I picked?
Somebody named Creighton?
No, I picked Creighton. I picked Creighton.
Okay.
Great. I said Creighton returns 3 all Big East freshmen in Ryan Nembhard, Trey Alexander, and Arthur Kaluma. Ryan Cockburner is the defensive difference maker that McDermott hasn't really had before with his best teams, and Baylor Shireman is the icing on top as the team to beat in the Big East.
R.I.P. to Ryan Nembhard's Creighton career, by the way.
R.I.P. Big 12. Who'd you take?
Baylor.
I took Baylor too. What was I doing?
This one I don't feel too bad about either. It just didn't happen.
Yeah, but
there
it's
were
like
reasons.
One of the 7 philosophies. It's one of the 7 philosophies. Just don't pick anybody other than Kansas unless it's completely obvious. Well, but also my kind of thing in the Big 12 pod was, are we sure Kansas is going to be that good?
Yes.
So, and that's one of my bigger swing and misses, along with the consensus swing and miss of North Carolina.
Yeah. Yeah, they were good. They just weren't good enough. So, yeah.
That's a pretty good way to put it, Josh. Also, Adam Flagler moving sorry, not Adam Flagler. LJ Cryer moving now in conference from Baylor to Houston is a very interesting move.
Oh yeah, we got some portal things happening. Yeah.
Big 10.
Illinois.
I picked Illinois too.
See, we get half credit on this one because we both said Indiana's not winning this conference.
This is true.
Now, neither of us could correctly identify which team was going to surpass them.
Mm-hmm.
But that was where we had the courage to differ from most people and turned out to be correct. Yeah, we just swung and missed badly on which team it was going to be.
Yeah, I mean, it swung badly in the sense that there was a team that won the conference by 3 games, but also Illinois was like part of this massive group that finished 12-8 or 11-9. So like apart from Purdue, so like that was the biggest swing and a miss.
Yeah.
But but other than that, it was kind of because neither of us were all that confident, right? It
Right.
was kind of a Brad Underwood has figured out how to win a lot of games, and it was like clear that it wasn't the talent that kind of
Right.
derailed Illinois this year.
Right.
There was definitely some, hey, this guy quit on us kind of like there was definitely some strife in the Illinois locker room.
And they just couldn't figure it out. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I remember a big part of my Illinois thing this year was thinking that guys like RJ Melendez. Yeah, I was all in on RJ Melendez taking a big step, and it didn't really happen.
No.
Pac-12.
Thank goodness for the Pac-12.
Shouts to UCLA, baby.
I got one right.
Was this the only one you got right?
Yeah.
Shouts to UCLA. Let's go.
They were the best team in the conference. They looked like it on paper.
Mm-hmm.
I remember talking about Arizona's depth concerns.
Mm-hmm.
That was spot on. That's really all there is to it.
That's really all there is to it. SEC.
Kentucky.
See, I didn't pick Kentucky here.
You were correct on this. This is one of your big W's.
No, I didn't pick Alabama.
No, you didn't pick Alabama, but you were absolutely correct about how Kentucky's season was going to go.
And I also picked a team that finished behind Kentucky, and Tennessee actually finished 11-7 in the SEC this year. Finished with a better record than Kentucky, but Kentucky 12-6. Of course, Alabama going 16-2 in conference was. I wasn't expecting that one to happen. Texas A&M finishing 15-3 in conference. Really, I wasn't expecting that one to happen. But yes, this was my hesitation with this team. And also when we get to All-Americans, a team that I did not put Oscar Tshiebwe on preseason. I was just kind of, I did a good job with Kentucky in preseason.
Yes, you did. Bravo.
Thank you. Did I miss any of the conferences? Is that all the conferences?
Yeah, I talked about all 6.
I talked about all 6 as well. Good. I'm glad we've worked on we've done a great job in our counting. Alrighty. So I feel like that's how we normally do. We get I mean, the only massive swing and a miss was North Carolina. Yeah. Everybody else. There were some really, really, really good conference performances this year. And none of them were from the team that I was expecting to have the right. We had a 17-3 in the Big East from Marquette, a team that was picked. I looked it up this morning. I think 9th in the Big East, 8th or 9th.
Somewhere in there, yeah.
Right, you have Kansas doing what they do there, but Alabama 16-2 in conference. There were just UCLA. We did get that one right, but even 18-2 in conference. That's a whale of a conference performance.
Yeah.
Purdue as well. There were some really, really high quality conference performances this year, and they just didn't come from the teams that we had designated as the team most likely to do it. That's what it is.
From start to finish, the season was consistent in its bizarreness.
Consistency. Everybody sucks, right? But then you look at the conference records and like, well, there are like 4 teams that don't suck. But then the team that won the national championship went 13-7 in the Big East. I don't know. Don't ask me. I don't have the answers, Josh. I don't have the answers. Okay, that's conference predictions. Let's go NCAA tournament now. And these are. I was looking back on these, and I went annoyingly chalk on my NCAA tournament picks, which I guess is like kind of how like if you're playing the numbers, then like that's probably the best way to do it. But my number 1 seeds. I went 1 for 4 in my number 1 seeds.
As did I.
I went 3 for 4 in my 1 seeds making the NCAA tournament. Thanks, North Carolina. And I struck out in the Final 4. That's okay. Your number 1 seed, Josh.
Yeah. Gonzaga.
Yep.
Baylor.
Yep.
Houston. Got that one.
We did get that one. Shouts to Houston.
And North Carolina.
Did we have the same number one seeds? That's so lame. We're so lame.
I guess we did. Yeah.
Yes, that is what I had as well. And your final four. I mean, I guess we should stop for a moment and recognize that the actual number one seeds were Alabama, Houston, shouts, Purdue, and Kansas. Those were your four number one seeds. Your final four.
Gonzaga.
Yep.
Was close. Arkansas, which I feel like you kind of get a redo on.
I feel like you get a redo. I feel like you get like a hall pass or something.
Yeah. Baylor. I went all in on Baylor. That just, wasn't there.
I also had Baylor.
And then the other one that I came incredibly close to getting was Creighton.
All right.
So from an NCAA tournament perspective, it wasn't that bad. From are these teams actually for the best teams in the country standpoint? Not great.
Mm-hmm. Not all four. Baylor lost in the round of 32. But my final four was Gonzaga, Houston, Texas, and Baylor.
That's right.
So 2 of my 4 even though I struck out swinging in a final four that had a 5, 4, 5, and 9 seed, I had 2 of my 4 final four teams get to the Elite Eight. Honestly, I'll take it. It's not in a year where no top 3 seeds made it to the Final Four. I will take that 2 of my 4 Final Four picks preseason made it to the Elite Eight.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
San Diego State, FAU, Miami, and UConn, for anyone who has forgotten in the last week. And I believed, were we in lockstep with our national champion?
I think.
I went with Gonzaga.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think here's what I said. I've been on them the past 2 seasons, and I'm not stopping now. They're almost under everyone's radar. And then my bullet points were, I think they have the best player in the country. That was incorrect. Big fan of the step I think Nolan Hickman is going to take. Big swing and a miss. Malachi Smith being on the team. I think that was a good call, and in the tournament he had some shining moments, if you will. Yeah, that's about it. That's about it. There was a lot of kind of reiterating the whole, I think there are other teams in the spotlight and Gonzaga is not, which is kind of funny enough what the point that we got to in the NCAA tournament when they were on their way to an Elite Eight.
Yeah. But the mistake was buying into the guards.
That's correct. The guard play was nowhere near as good as it needs to be.
Because you and I were both saying these guys are here, these guys are ready to take the next step to surround Drew Timme with what he needs, and it just never happened.
Yes. Yeah. And like honestly, nobody else was. I mean, like even like Julian Strother was fine.
Yeah,
he wasn't great. Like he didn't turn into the like there were. I remember having conversations about is that kind of the guy that really cements himself as one of the better perimeter players in the country.
First round pick.
Right. And kind of a guy threatening like even the lottery. And that just didn't happen as well. And like Timme was, and it was almost impossible for Timme to over exceed expectations. So like Timme was just fine this year, but didn't have like an all worldly season either.
Yeah.
I'll take it, honestly. I got one number one seed and 0 Final Four picks. I don't know off the top of my head how I've done in the past, but that doesn't seem very good. I hope I haven't.
No, I feel like we're generally aiming in the 50% range, right?
Perhaps.
At least for conferences.
Yeah. Also, last year it's easier to get when both Villanova and Duke make the Final Four. It's was Villanova, Duke, Kansas,
North Carolina,
North Carolina and Kansas, right?
Yeah.
Those 4 blue bloods. It's easier to do well, I think, when those 4 teams make the Final Four, even with North Carolina coming out of nowhere to do it.
Right.
Okay, those are NCAA tournament and conference picks. Now here's the point where we marry our preseason picks with our postseason picks. Starting with the National Player of the Year, because Josh, this is just not a super fun conversation because there's just a right answer, and that's sometimes how these things go, specifically National Player of the Year. I had Drew Timme in the preseason. Were you in the same place?
Yes. And I put, and my prediction was accurate in the 4 words that I put next to Drew Timme. They just didn't apply to Drew Timme. And those words were, don't think it's close.
I think I said I've been consistent with this all off season. First season since the arrival of Drew Timme that he's clearly the top dog in Spokane, which is an interesting thing to say. I think that was a correct thing to say, but he took 28% of Gonzaga's shots 2 years ago, and I thought without Chet Holmgren that was going to go up, and all of those things adding up to, I thought you're right, with Gonzaga being one of the best teams in the country, I thought the writing was in the sand for Drew Timme to be National Player of the Year.
Yeah.
Instead, the writing was clearly in the sand for Purdue to be the number 1 team in the country at one point this season, 2 points this season, to win the Big Ten, and for Zach Edey to be far and away the best player in the country.
6th in scoring, 2nd in rebounding, 21st in field goal percentage. Yeah. 22.3 and 12.9. I mean, It's just preposterous. His passing. We'll talk about him more later because obviously he's not done showing up on these lists.
Right.
Yeah. It's not an interesting conversation. He's just Natty Boy.
He's just Natty Boy. 22.3, 12.9, and 2.1. The 2.1 being blocks.
Yeah.
That's quite the. I was looking. So for my first team, for my all important team, more specifically, I kind of started with win shares, who led the country in win shares. Zach Edey was first in the country at 8.8, and just foreshadowing, I made the decision that I wasn't going to cross my first team All America and my first team All Important because I thought that was less fun. I will agree with you when you have first team All America guys on your All Important team, but I just thought it would be more fun to not. So. But with that being said, there was a bigger gap between Zach Edey at 1, and I think it was Tyler Perry from North Texas at 2, and 2 and 10. Like Zach Edey had a whole win share more than Tyler Perry, and then he had 8.8, Tyler Perry had 7.8, and then 10th on the list had 7 win shares this season. So, yeah. Just to illustrate just how dominant he was this season. Did we make preseason coach of the year picks? I didn't find any on my prep sheet. No. So we will not have one, but I will ask you, dig into your mind a little bit here. If I had asked you preseason, who would you have what are the couple coaches that pop up in your head first?
It's a really good question.
I know.
Probably right? McDermott.
Yep. I think that's a good one.
Underwood. Those would probably be the 2.
Let's see. Preseason AP poll.
And then I would want to believe that somewhere in there, I would have said Jerome Tang is going to make Kansas State a lot better than you think, while also not having the courage to actually say they'd be good enough for him to get National Coach of the Year conversation.
Fair. So going back to the week 1 AP All-America team, AP All-America. Yeah, I think those are good ones.
Maybe Scott Drew with how high I was on Baylor.
Perhaps. Yeah. There's nothing immediately jumping off the page here.
Mark Few.
Shouts to Mark Few, man. Shouts to Mark Few. Yeah, I think those are kind of every once in a blue moon do I go way off the beaten path with preseason coach of the year. There was a year I picked Penny Hardaway to be preseason coach of the year. That didn't happen, but right at some point, coach of the year is either like someone has to do something really impressive to be coach of the year that was nowhere on anybody's radar, because a lot of the time, and usually a season kind of like this kind of ends up being when you get a coach
Right.
that you weren't expecting, because
There was
if there's a preseason top 4 team that goes on to win the national championship, that guy's probably going to be coach of the year.
yeah, there was no way any of those guys were going to get it this year with how inconsistent everybody was.
Right. All right. With that being said, who's your national coach of the year?
Shaka.
I went with Shaka too.
Two primary reasons. One, I mean, this was between Shaka Smart and Jerome Tang.
I tickled the Matt Painter keys. I tickled them.
Okay.
I decided that Zach Edey was a bigger reason why, though. So
I will accept Matt Painter as a finalist.
But we went from not even a top 25 team to multiple times being number 1 in the country, and then losing in the round of 64 doesn't totally help your case. But I think in hindsight, people won't think of this year as a really good Matt Painter coaching job
because of how good of a coaching job he did.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
But yes, ultimately, kind of the two guys I was picking between. I have a reason why. Ultimately, I went with Shaka Smart other than Jerome Tang, but I think those were two of the strongest cases. And
just comparing the two teams first, I feel like they're pretty comparable. Obviously they ended up a 2 and 3 seed. Kansas State probably wins the Big East, right? Based on the way that everything played out with the other teams in the Big East.
I mean, if Marquette is also in there?
No, sorry. If you switch them.
Oh, if you switch.
If you just replace Marquette with Kansas State.
Yeah, probably.
With how consistent Kansas State was in the Big 12. And I feel like if you put Marquette in the Big 12, they're going to be up there. They're not going to win the conference. They did have the benefit of having some inconsistency from the Creightons and UConns of the world in conference play.
Sure.
So at that point, they're pretty much equal to me. So then I went and looked and said, okay, this is coach of the year. Do I want to lean toward the guy who completely rebuilt a roster using the transfer portal, or the guy who took his team from last year and completely elevated them based on internal improvement? I'll take the guy who had the internal improvement, who players got better under him from one year to the next. So that was the tiebreaker for me. Is I will always give more credit to the coach. And yes, it's what Jerome Tang did was incredible. We've talked about it all year. Mm-hmm. I will give the tiebreaker to the guy who just turned Tyler Kolek into, the Big East Player of the Year, and Cam Jones into one of the better scorers in the country, and who got this team that couldn't play offense to turn into an offensive juggernaut.
Uh-huh.
That part of it for a Coach of the Year award. Now, you can talk about which one of those two things is more important for a coach, but that's not the conversation here. The conversation is who did the best coaching job, and Shaka Smart, to me, is the answer to that question.
Yeah, I think, and kind of getting at the same thing, like Jerome Tang did a phenomenal job this year, and all of the coaches who are just now getting new jobs should hate Jerome Tang because he's just single-handedly knocking down the I need time to rebuild the program kind of thing. Yep. Right now he's the type of place that even guy that everybody, and I can't remember who it was I saw yesterday, but I saw a list of a high major transfer, and a list of his potential schools that he was going to transfer to, and Kansas State was on them, and I was, thinking to myself, that's exactly right. I expect to see Kansas State on a lot of lists. Anyways, but the difference for me. The difference for me is I also at the same time I think Jerome Tang caught lightning in a bottle with Marquise Noel and Keontae Johnson. It was I just think Shaka's coaching job was a little bit better because there was a little bit more of I thought Marquette was a more well-rounded basketball team than Kansas State this year. I thought they were Marquette, Kansas State might have had this. I mean, well, that's an interesting conversation. I mean, they probably split the top 4. Maybe Kansas State has 2 of the top 3. If you ranked the
Oh
players on
yeah,
these 2 teams,
Kansas State has 2 of the top 3.
right? I
Marquette
mean,
has
it's probably
3 of the top 5.
right. So it's probably like maybe you throw Tyler Kolek in the middle of
Yes,
Marquise Noel and Keontae
Andre
Johnson, and then
Johnson.
Cam Jones
Cam Jones
is
is 4.
4th.
Yep, and that probably. Oof.
But then Marquette probably
Iguodala?
has. But then Marquette probably has 5 of the top 7.
Yeah, something like that.
And so I just thought that the Marquette team and Shaka's, that it speaks just slightly, ever so slightly. We're talking about 2 coaches that had really incredible years.
Yeah.
None of this is a shot at Jerome Tang.
No, we don't do that on this podcast.
It's just kind of splitting hairs. Kind of splitting hairs here, which is kind of what you have to do when 2 guys that were picked to finish last in the Big 12 and like 3rd to last in the Big East end up having the performances that they did. But I ended up in the Shaka Smart boat as well.
It can be as simple as if I told you that Keontae Johnson became an All-American at Kansas State, or that Tyler Kolek won Big East Player of the Year. Which of those is more conceivable? I would argue it's Keontae. Now, that's simplifying it, of course. I would argue it's Keontae Johnson becoming an All-American. He was, a preseason SEC Player of the Year. Is it improbable because of what he's gone through? Absolutely. But there's a world in which you go, oh, yeah, well, if he can stay healthy, if it all works out physically, of course that dude can change the trajectory of your program. We saw what he could do at Florida. Whereas you're looking around just kind of going, why is this Marquette team so good at offense all of a sudden?
Right. And like, it also matters to me just a little bit that Marquette won the Big East.
Absolutely. Sure.
And I think there's certainly an argument that Kansas State in Marquette's place wins the Big East. Like I'm happy. Like I don't think that's incorrect, but
and
they're not in the Big East.
And conference tournament too.
Right. But they're not in the Big East. So and Marquette is, and they ran through the regular season and postseason awards for that conference. So that matters to me a little bit as well.
Sure.
All right. First team All-America. Let's start with where we were roughly 6 months ago with our first team All-Americas. Why am I scrolling so far? I copy and pasted it to the bottom of my prep doc, so I didn't have to scroll, and then I went scrolling. Okay, first team All-America from the beginning of the 2022-23 season. Let's bounce back and forth, and we'll and just kind of shout out if we share a guy on the list.
Okay.
Start. Give me one.
Marcus Sasser.
I simply said best guard in the country, so he made my list. Yes.
Mike Miles.
No Mike Miles on my team.
The candidacy was fine. The injury didn't help. He just wasn't quite good enough. I won't take that back, though. I was more right than wrong. Just not right enough.
TCU probably wasn't quite good enough.
Yeah.
That was part of it. My second guard was Kendrick Davis, and I am completely fine with the individual campaign that Kendrick Davis put together. That from his numbers perspective, I've got no issue with the season that Kendrick Davis put together. Here's what Kendrick Davis averaged this year at Memphis: 21.9, 5.4, and 3.7 rebounds. Add 2 steals to the equation. His splits were 41, 34, 85. So not great efficiency numbers, but he also took
not awful.
But also not awful when you're taking 16 shots a game.
Yeah.
The thing that I needed, what I wrote down was second best guard in the country on a surprise team, and Memphis just wasn't good enough. And in the national, like if Memphis rattles off a bunch of wins early, and I don't remember off the top of my head what their non-conference looked like, so I don't even know if there was kind of a road for them to be like, oh, that's Memphis, the number 12 team in the country and undefeated through 12 games. I mean, they had a Seton Hall game early.
Vanderbilt.
Like probably the thing that would need to happen is that they need to be undefeated heading into the December 10th game against Auburn and the December 13th game against Alabama. And if they win both of those games, then you're talking about a team that's 11-0
Mhm.
heading into Christmas, basically. And then I think we would have been able to have a conversation. But they lost to St. Louis in the second game of the season, lost to Seton Hall. So they were 2-2 through 4. And like at that point, you're just not going to have non-conference buzz if you're Memphis.
Yeah.
So that's the thing that didn't happen. I needed them to get into the spotlight early and for him to have the type of season that he ultimately did, but it just wasn't, they weren't good enough for Kendrick Davis to be able to sneak into the first team All-America conversation.
Yeah.
All right, keep going for me.
Drew Timme.
I also had Drew Timme. The national player of the year is what I said. Very, very,
Yeah.
very short and to the point here.
Next was Oscar Sheboy. Maybe he wasn't quite good enough in a year where there were so many good bigs that he did kind of fall back in that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And also, they were nowhere near good enough for him to be part of the national conversation because of what they were doing.
Right. Yeah, I put why no Oscar Sheboy here. I had the quote from Calipari, because we did this like days before the Champions Classic. And Calipari said, I would be stunned if he played Monday. I would be somewhat surprised if he played Friday. So I just didn't want to put a guy on my first team All-America list that potentially could be struggling with even if, with getting back to 100% for the first month of the season. But really, I think you're right. The thing that worked against Oscar Sheboy probably more than anything was just how good really two guys in the country were. Right. I mean, like,
and Timme too.
Right. Timme probably gets a first team All-America bid this year before Sheboy does as well. But like, I had Armando Bacot on this team.
Mm-hmm.
I had three bigs on this team along with Marcus Sasser and Kendrick Davis. Armando Bacot was the other one, was the second along with Drew Timme. And so it wasn't like, yes, there were some guys added to the pile that I didn't expect to be there, a la Zach Edey. But also a guy like Armando Bacot was never in the conversation after about 3 weeks. So it's not like everybody that was supposed to be there was there, and you added a couple guys on. There was some shuffling, but Sheboy just right Kentucky, and he just wasn't in the conversation enough.
And I got the Armando Bacot part right.
Yes, you did.
Except in his place. Do you remember who I submitted?
Oh, that's a fun game.
It's not a like-for-like replacement, but this was my final.
Yeah. Oh, it was Keontae George, right?
Yeah. Whoops. And he was good. Again, not necessarily him. He just wasn't one of the 10 best players in the country, and they weren't one of the 10 best teams in the country.
He got off to a good start.
He had a really good year. It just wasn't quite enough.
The last player on my list was Trey Jackson-Davis. That was my last first team All-America preseason guy. I put up really, really good stats for a team competing for a Big Ten title, and that was the bulk of my thing. And he was better than even I expected him to be. He was spectacular. He is on my first team All-America postseason, and he, along with Zach Edey, like, there are some really nice seasons from the guys that are on my first team All-America, obviously, but him and Trace Jackson-Davis and Zach Edey, their numbers are just #different. They are just different, and he was spectacular. Better than I thought, than I was picturing in my head when I put him on this team, but felt good about that one.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, postseason first team All-America. We'll start at the guard position. Who's your first guard?
Jalen Pickett.
Jalen Pickett?
Listen. I will not have this outrage.
That's fine.
Jalen Pickett shot the ball better than Marcus Sasser from the floor, and basically the same from three. Well, putting up all of the other numbers in terms of the rebounding and the assists that are just ridiculous when you put them all together.
Mm-hmm.
I was going back and forth between the two of them. And ultimately, Marcus Sasser would have won out because his team was better.
I think that matters.
It does matter. I just decided it didn't matter enough with what Jalen Pickett did and the fact that they got to the NCAA tournament and the fact that they made the run in the Big Ten tournament. And Marcus Sasser needed to do something better for me. And I didn't see enough then.
I did see enough there. Marcus Sasser is the first guard of mine. And you'll be happy to hear that this is not the last time we'll hear about Jalen Pickett in this podcast.
Okay. Interesting.
Okay. So you can get off my back with the outrage. Who's the next guard / perimeter guy?
Jalen Wilson.
Jalen Wilson is also on my team. 20.1 points, 8.3 rebounds, 2.2 assists.
He was sensational. Not only was he one of the best 5 players in the country, he was also the person that made it possible for Kansas to be what Kansas was.
Yeah.
That part of it matters for me as well. Yeah, he was there was no conversation. He was just on the list.
I preseason when talking in the Big 12, in one of my bullet points in the Big 12 conference season preview, one of my storylines was, can Jalen Wilson be the best player on a top 5 team in the sport? Mm-hmm. And the answer was yes. Yeah. Right? Like, because last year was 11.1 points, 7.4 rebounds, right? Last season, playing behind 2 NBA draft picks and Christian Brown and Ochai Agbaji. And it was the question of, can he turn into kind of that go-to scorer and you put it perfectly, kind of the guy who elevates the rest of the team? And the answer was absolutely yes. Absolutely. Yeah, he was the next guy on my list as well. 20.1, 8.3, 2.2, Big 12 Player of the Year, really special season.
Mm-hmm.
Who's next?
Brandon Miller.
I also have Brandon Miller on my team. 18.8, 8.2, and 2.1.
Yeah, best player on the best team in the country in terms of, number 1 overall seed, what they did. Obviously, there was a lot that went on off the court. That's not really taken into consideration here. He was sensational. They were sensational. He individually was good enough to get this spot, and then their team success allowed him to also have that opportunity. So it was kind of the best of both worlds, where he probably doesn't get it just based on what he did, but he did more than enough based on what Alabama did, if that makes sense.
100%. This is just he just needs to be on. Like, I almost did a mini protest and didn't put him on this list, but it's just like, he was so clearly one of the 5 best players in the country this season. He just was. Okay, yeah, those were my perimeter / guard guys. I really hope we have the same next 2.
I'm pretty sure we do.
2 Big Ten bigs?
Yeah.
Okay. Trace Jackson Davis at Indiana, 20.9, 10.8, 4 assists, 2.9 blocks. Became the all-time Indiana all-time blocks leader this season. One of the best players to ever put on an Indiana uniform, at least for my money. And that is a really, really special thing to be. And, he announced that he's going to enter into the NBA draft, and it looks like that his Indiana career is over. But this was a heck of a way to end his Indiana career. It was a really, really special season.
And they delivered. Did they deliver the way most people expected them to? No, because that was never realistic.
They delivered how we expected them to.
Yeah.
If you told me that they went 23-12
right,
and finished 4th or whatever they finished in the Big Ten. No, 2nd. Sorry.
Yeah, right. And we're the 2nd best team in the Big Ten. Yeah.
Sorry, Big Ten. Yes. Finished 2nd, tied for 2nd in the Big Ten, and
Sweet 16.
Won a game in the tournament. No, they didn't go to the Sweet 16.
Oh, right. Sorry. Second round. Yeah.
But yeah, pretty spot on where I thought Indiana was going to end up. But he was so good all season.
Yeah. They were good enough that he got into this conversation, and then he did the rest of it with his production. And The part he doesn't get enough credit for is what he does defensively.
100%.
Because he's not a traditional rim protector. But that doesn't mean he doesn't protect the rim.
Right.
Right? He's a different kind of big. Mm-hmm. And I really, to me, he's one of those guys. He's going to figure it out at the next level. He's not going to be a star, but he's too good at too many things to not find a way to impact in a positive way in the NBA.
I'm telling you, dude. I'm telling you, he needs to call Domantas Sabonis and give him whatever he needs to let him work out with him during the summer. Like whatever Sabonis needs to sweeten that deal, you give it to him and you go worship that guy. Because I mean, Sabonis is a first team NBA, first team All NBA type caliber player, and Trayce Jackson-Davis probably isn't going to be that. But there are a lot of things that Sabonis does that Trayce Jackson did that I can picture Trayce Jackson-Davis doing.
Now there is an important difference,
which is
Sabonis is a good 3-point shooter and a really good mid-range shooter. Yeah,
but he also didn't shoot in college.
Sure, right.
Because I've made this comparison before.
Yeah.
And Sabonis wasn't a shooter, not a good shooter. He wasn't a shooter. Like he didn't shoot. And now there were like he kind of suggested that he was working on it in his final year. And when you look at how many 3-point field goal attempts he took, like relative to the year before, like he didn't take a lot, but there was clearly like a shift in like, okay, I'm going to take some 3-pointers this year. He didn't make very many of them. And it's like, he took, 23 or something his final year of college. Like, it's not like he took 3 a game. He took like less than 1 a game, but right. Trayce Jackson-Davis, I think, took like 2 or 3 threes his entire Indiana career.
Yeah. Because that's the difference, right? They obviously have the same kind of foundational skill set, and you could argue there are things defensively Trayce Jackson-Davis can do that Sabonis doesn't.
Yep.
But you can't. A guy who's that good at passing with that much size, you can't guard them when they can also shoot the ball.
Right.
They just. I don't know what you're supposed to do when you have the back to the basket, the traditional big skills, and the ability to stretch the floor, and the ability to then use the court that opens up to go get the ball to your teammates. It's a lethal combination. Right.
Yeah. The thing I was thinking about, because the other guy on this list is of course Zach Edey, 22.3, 12.9, and 2.1 blocks. I was thinking, so why does Trayce Jackson-Davis block more shots a game than Zach Edey? And where I ended was Trayce Jackson, and kind of to the point that you were getting at, even though you perhaps didn't even realize you were getting to it for me, was that Trayce Jackson-Davis doesn't present the, oh my gosh, I can't get a shot off against this guy thing that Zach Edey does, right? Like there are shots that the guy driving to the rim isn't even going to try to take because Zach Edey is there. And I'm not sure that's quite the case with Trayce Jackson-Davis.
No, it's a lot
Trayce
of,
Jackson-Davis is a much more dangerous shot blocker than Zach Edey is. Zach Edey is just a shot blocker because the guy is taller than almost everybody who's ever existed on the planet. But to that point you were getting at, right? There are a lot of shots that are just not taken because Zach Edey is there, and Trayce Jackson-Davis gets to a ton of shots and blocks them.
Yeah, it's a lot of recovery stuff, a lot of help defense, right? Cutting across the lane to block a layup, coming from behind to block a layup. Yeah.
He has a lot of those, wow, he came out of nowhere blocks.
Exactly, right. More the athleticism than the size, absolutely.
Sneaky athletic, too. Because he doesn't move, like it's not like he moves poorly, but you know what I mean? Like when you watch Trayce Jackson-Davis run down the court, it's not like, wow, that guy is a physical specimen. But then he rises up to block a shot, and you're like, whoa, that was really impressive.
Yeah.
Anywho. Yeah. Okay, that's that. So my 5, Marcus Sasser, Brandon Miller, Jalen Wilson, Trayce Jackson-Davis, Zach Edey. So we differ on the first guard position. Don't worry. Your boy Jalen Pickett's going to make a return here in just a couple minutes. But a really, really special group of players.
Yeah, my analysis on Zach Edey was duh.
I like that. Okay, hold on. College basketball. So let's play a game real quick. Let's play a game just because we're here. Okay. So first team also, so real quick, second team All-America, Jaime Jaquez, Jalen Pickett, Drew Timmy, Oscar Shibwe, Azelis Tabelis. Armando Baycott, third team, Keontae Johnson, Tyler Collett, Chris Murray, Marquise Noel. Just for fun. Okay. So we're going to play this game. This team, so we'll just take your team. Okay. So we'll use Jalen Pickett instead of Marcus Sasser, but really just kind of flip, but those four other guys. They play a 3-game series against the 2021-22 NCAA first team All-America. Agbaji, Coburn, Johnny Davis, Keegan Murray, Oscar Shibwe. Who wins the series?
Oh, these guys.
I think so too. Johnny Davis might be the worst first round NBA draft pick literally ever. At least lottery. It's got to be close. Like that dude doesn't know how to play basketball. I'm convinced. Like I think he forgot.
I don't think it's close.
I think this team is like, yeah. 2020-21. Jared Butler, Cade Cunningham, Ayo Dosunmu, Luka Garza, Corey Kispert.
Ooh.
See the issue there. Intriguing. See the issue there is who in the world guards Zach Edey.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, like the answer is Luka Garza, but then but Luka Garza was like many things. Defensive stopper, not one of them.
Yeah.
And then Trace Jackson Davis is going to get Corey Kispert. Yeah. Okay.
I still think I like these guys. It's a much more interesting conversation. But
other part of this is that in theory you have this Brandon Miller 2-way guy on the the perimeter.
Yes, who can guard Cade Cunningham.
Right.
Yeah. That's more of a matchup. And
if you're going Marcus Sasser, then Marcus Sasser, Jared Butler, and then you have Jalen Wilson on Ayo, I guess.
Yeah.
That's a fun team though. 2019-20. I'll take this team, but here you go. Luka Garza, I'll take this year's team, not the 20 team.
Okay.
But the 2019-20. Do you want to guess?
Oh, jeez. So this is the year that got cut short because of COVID.
Correct.
Yes. Okay. So Garza.
Yep.
Azubuike.
No, Azubuike was a second team All-American.
Oh. Okay.
Your team, one of those teams high on the list of, man, that program got robbed not getting to see that team in the tournament.
Conference?
A-10.
Oh, Obi Toppin.
Yep. Then you got two Big East guards.
Gillespie?
Nope.
Howard?
Yep.
And Powell?
Marcus Howard and Miles Powell. And then you're missing another guard. Another journeyman college basketball guard who now wears the same color in the NBA that he did in college.
Is that supposed to help?
I mean, the color's green.
Conference?
Pac-12.
Green.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, Peyton Pritchard.
That's correct. That's the, and then we'll arrive at a team that would probably beat this year's team, and that's the 2018-19 First Team All-America of R.J. Barrett, John Morant, Grant Williams, Zion Williamson, and Cassius Winston.
Yeah,
I think we can stop there. And the team the next year might beat them too. That's DeAndre Ayton, Marvin Bagley, Jalen Brunson, Devontae Graham, and Trae Young. It's a lot of fun on that team.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a fun game to play.
That is a fun game.
All right,
thank you for sharing.
The Colin Gillespie First Team All Important list. How much overlap do you have here?
I got two guys.
Two guys. Okay. I think if you asked me if I had made the decision to have guys from both on my First Team All America on this team, I think I would have ended up with two guys. I think that's where I would have ended up. Okay. Let's start with the guys that have already been mentioned. Okay. And then we can go to the guys that are unique to this list. Okay. Who is the first guy that makes the jump?
Zach Edey.
Yeah.
I will say one of the first guys that I left out that I was really considering was Trace Jackson Davis.
Yeah, I actually think that that Trace Jackson Davis would have ended up on this list faster than Zach Edey for me. I think maybe both of them would have ended up there though.
I was really toying with it to the point where I almost kicked one of my guards off to get them both in there.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, though, yeah, you mentioned the win shares, and Zach Edey just fundamentally changes the way teams play defense.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue there was less talent around him than Trace Jackson Davis had, as good as TJD was.
I would probably agree with that.
Right. Part of the excitement about Indiana was look
Jalen
at what
Hood-Schifino would have been immediately the second best player on Purdue's team.
Yes. And then you've got, I understand they had some injuries, but, Race Thompson, you can go down the list. That was part of why everybody was so excited about Indiana was you have a star that, right, all-American caliber player, possibly the best player in the Big Ten, plus some help.
Mm-hmm.
If you take Zach Edey off that Purdue team, who are they?
Bad.
That's ultimately why I went with him.
Sure.
Not only, what he does to change the way teams guard and the way he made everybody else on that team's life better. The second guy I have is Jalen Wilson.
Okay.
Because we both sat here and said, I don't see it. Not him in particular, but this Kansas team of they're just going to go be the best team in the best conference in the country again. They're just going to go be a number one seed again with so little coming back. And, Kevin McCullough was fine. It's not like he was otherworldly. What changed? Jalen Wilson just said, I'll go give you 25 whenever you need it. In terms of players that mean the most to their teams, he also, it's really those six guys, the five I have in Trace Jackson Davis that stood out to me. Because, that Kansas team, nobody else could have done what he did for that team, right? They don't have another guy that can go give you 25. And the way he just willed them to some wins, the way he just kept them in games. And then you also saw what happened when he didn't play well and they got blown out because nobody could kind of compensate for that. To me, that screams all important.
I have a hard time arguing with any of that. I made the executive decision to not have these two teams overlap, so that's the only reason I disagree with these. Right, the only reason. Mm-hmm. And I think those are absolutely valid. Those are absolutely. I'll start with the guy that you had on your first team All-America with Jalen Pickett. 17. He led the team in points, rebounds, and assists.
Yeah.
Like I'm not sure what else you want from him, right? 17.7 points, 7.4 rebounds, 6.6 assists. And like it's just like everything everybody does for Penn State stems in some way from what Jalen Pickett does for Penn State. And a lot of these guys fall under that category. But whether it's Seth Lundy, like Andrew Funk was so much fun to watch this year, but like Andrew Funk gets to take open shots when he's as good of a three-point shooter as he is because of the pressure that Jalen Pickett puts on the defense, right? He didn't make my first team All-America because they needed a run in the Big Ten tournament to make the NCAA tournament. Like that's where they ended up at the end of the year, and they did it. And a lot of that is credit to Jalen Pickett, and and they did it, and so they get credit for that. But the reason I went with Marcus Sasser is that sometimes, like, Houston was also one of the best teams in the country this year, and I thought Sasser was the best player on that team. So sometimes I just got to put that guy on my first team All-America. But Pickett was spectacular and is at the top of the what does that guy not do list. Mm-hmm. So that's why he ended up here rather than on my first team All-America. But he was really close to being on the other team and not this one, if that makes sense. It's almost a consolation prize.
And I have Marcus Sasser on this team for that exact reason.
Okay.
I had a hard time, as much as I love him, justifying Jalen Pickett as one of the five most important players in the country when the ceiling to that team was what it was.
Sure.
Whereas you saw Houston without Marcus Sasser and you saw Houston with Marcus Sasser. Those are two, as good as the rest of the Houston roster was, those are two different basketball teams.
Right.
So to me, Jalen Pickett had the more outstanding individual season. Marcus Sasser was the more important player because he was what made them a national title contender.
Okay.
Because without him, they're the team that played Northern Kentucky.
Fair.
Now, is that a simplification? Of course. They're not actually that bad every single night. But he is what made them a good offensive team, a team offensively capable of winning a national championship. As opposed to being in that same category as Virginia year after year, where everybody just goes, well, they're so bad offensively, they can't win a national title, and doesn't even care whether they're actually good offensively or not, like they were when they actually won. Because you always kind of push back on this thing with Houston all year, what I just kept saying, I just don't know if they can do it for 6 games. And you kept saying, well, they're scoring enough points, and obviously they're good enough defensively. Marcus Sasser is the reason for that, because he can go get you 20 every single game.
It's hard to argue with. Okay, who's next on your list?
Why don't you go? Because I've already given 3 guys.
Oh, you've given 3. Okay.
Yeah.
So I've got 3 guards, 1 wing, and a big guy.
As do I.
So you've given a guard, a big guy, and who was the other
my
one?
Wing. Jalen Wilson. My wing.
Right. Okay. A guard, a big guy, and a wing. So I'll give you 1 guard. I'll give you my wing and my big guy, and then we can go with the last 2. That work?
Okay. So you already gave 1 guard, right?
Yeah. So I'll give you my wing, which is Jaime Jaquez from UCLA, because he was kind of in a similar Jalen Wilson conversation, because that was the question about UCLA was where do I go for offensive creativity when I've got to have it, and I just kind of like him along with Tiger Campbell. There was a lot of like kind of young guy question marks when it comes to like, how does Adam Dwona do? How does Amari Bailey do? And all of that stems from it. Like, it doesn't matter. Like Amari Bailey had a chance to kind of ease into this season because of how good Jaime Jaquez was. Mm-hmm. And Jaquez finishes second at KenPom and National Player of the Year rankings.
Wow.
He's all over the place in terms of, whether it's offensive rating and, rebounding, turnover rate, like steal percentage. Like he was just kind of right. He was the most important offensive player on the best team in the Pac-12, and the most important defender on the other side of the floor. Right.
Mm-hmm. Like that honor goes to Jalen Clark.
Okay. I mean, we can have that conversation if you want to, but if I've got 1 possession and I need somebody to lock down a guy for 1 possession, I want Jaime Jaquez.
Okay.
So he made my list, and then my big is Ryan Kalkbrenner.
I like that. Yeah.
It's a layup when you go out and your team sucks for 2.5 weeks.
Yeah. And then you come back and you almost make the Final Four.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And we talked about it, of course, like of course, Ryan Kalkbrenner was the defensive anchor that Greg McDermott didn't normally have.
Yeah.
It was also clear while he was out, the floor elevation that he brought to the offensive end of the floor and the efficiency, and letting guys like Baylor Shireman do their thing and not be that efficient because Ryan Kalkbrenner is so efficient.
And was scoring 20. It felt like every game in the NCAA tournament.
Right. Yeah. I mean, right. But he continued to prove that when he came back. But there were a lot of like Ryan Nembhard, not the most efficient guard in the world. Baylor Shireman, not the most efficient guard or perimeter guy in the world. And you're enabled to do that a little bit by the fact that you have Ryan Kalkbrenner. So, it's a bit of a layup because of how not good they were when he wasn't there and how good they were when he was, but still a guy that I wanted to add on this list.
I love that logic. I firmly believe if somebody, when Peyton Manning got hurt that year, you lose somebody for a year and you're terrible, MVP, absolutely. At least make him a finalist. Let
I
people vote for him.
adore,
100%.
I adore Peyton Manning. So I'm all, I will go to war for that one right there.
I said that example
I've got
specifically
my
just
musket.
for you.
I've got my musket. I'm ready. I'm ready. But yeah, so those are my other three. Those are my three. So now I'm caught up with you, right? Jalen Pickett, Jaime Jaquez, and Ryan Kalkbrenner. Who's next on your list?
I'll go with the one I think it's more likely you have.
Uh-huh.
And that is Tyler Kolek.
Tyler Kolek is also on my list. Yeah.
Not only what he actually provided on the stat sheet, but the fact that he is the one who made that offense go. You can't put you can't really quantify it. But all I know is they went from being a really bad offensive team to a really, really good one. And he was the biggest reason why. Is because he just got people good shots because of what he did, because of the pressure he put on defenses, because of the decisions he made. He just elevated everybody. Nobody else on that team is really built to carry the facilitation load. Cam Jones is a scorer. You've got some pick and roll kind of guys with Oso Ighodaro, for example. You can do a little bit of everything, but it doesn't become a well-oiled machine unless you have Kolek in there. And so to be that vital to a team that was that good, which is why both you and I gave Shaka Smart Coach of the Year, you got a really good argument for being on this team.
Yeah, I mean, the way I quantify it is that like Tyler Kolek became what we now know as Tyler Kolek, and Marquette went from a does that team have anything offensively to
Right.
that team can't be stopped offensively.
Yeah. Well, and by the way, losing we were talking about preseason that losing Justin Lewis might have been the most devastating draft decision of any team in the country. How quickly do we forget about that?
And part of that will be credit to Cam Jones because he kind of became that perimeter guy that filled the space, but it certainly didn't not like part of that pie did not include Tyler Kolek. And I also thought Tyler Kolek was really high on the list of understanding what his offensive role needed to be in a particular game. Because sometimes it was, hey, Tyler, we need you to score 7 points and have 12 assists. And then it was, hey, Tyler, Providence doesn't know how to guard the pick and roll, and you get this floater in the middle of the lane over and over and over again. We need you to score 35. Oh, okay, I can go do that too, right? And I think that's super, super valuable for anybody, but was part of the reason that he was so willing to be whatever he needed to be on that particular day and had the understanding along with the willingness to figure out which one he needed to be. And super, super valuable. And I also am just, I like he was probably my favorite player in college basketball this year. Probably like he's up there. There's a couple guys on the list, but he's probably up there. And like, this is a podcast. I get to say whatever I want to on it. Tyler Kolek goes on my first team all important. The Colin Gillespie first team all important.
That's the beauty of the all important team, right?
That's exactly right. Okay, who's the last player on your team?
I'm curious if we're the same here.
I'm gonna be sad if we are.
I went Marquise Noel.
Oh, we are not. Okay.
Cool. Just look at what the dude did. I mean, and to also be one of two guys returning, right? He was the facilitator for all of this. And by all of this, I mean also working the athletic department to get Jerome Tang as their coach. And again, right, this is our podcast. I'm going to count that a little bit in his favor too. And then you go see what he delivered. And a team that good, that was such a central story of the college basketball season, both what they did in the regular season and then what they did in the NCAA tournament and what he did in the NCAA tournament, to be so reliant upon two guys, one of them had to be recognized somewhere in here. And neither of them were good enough to be first-team All-Americans, which is why they both ended up on the third team. So this is where you can put one of them. And Keontae Johnson did not have a good NCAA tournament. they still got to the Elite Eight. Why? Because Marquise Noel is a significantly more valuable player. That's not a knock on Keontae Johnson. That's the reality of Marquise Noel having the ball in his hands. So I don't really feel like I need to justify this further. Look at what he did. Look at what they did. Look how they kind of connected.
The best case for that argument, right, is, I mean, and all season, but the last thing you said is, like, if I told you that Keontae Johnson was going, or if you told me that Keontae Johnson was going to have a bad tournament, I would probably have gone with a first weekend exit for Kansas State. And they got about as close as you can get to going to the Final Four and not going to the Final Four. And that was, and I also think, like, to go to bat for Keontae Johnson a little bit, when you're on a heater in Madison Square Garden and you're from New York, like, you just kind of have to keep going to that guy. Like, at some point, Jerome Tang was just like, okay, this is the guy we have to do everything through.
Yeah.
So I think that results a little bit in Keontae Johnson's, at least his statistical numbers, not being great. But you're right, he didn't have a good NCAA tournament, and was part of the reason they had to pivot to kind of Marquise Noel doing everything.
And my point was just more, if you flipped that, it doesn't work as well because he doesn't have the ball in his hands.
Sure.
Right. That's not Keontae Johnson's fault. That's just the reality of the positions they play. And that's why guards are so important.
Sure. But he also had the ball in his hands a ton all season, along with Marquise Noel. Yeah. But I think that's the best argument for it. And if we're turning this into the first team all important duos, they go on this list immediately.
Oh yeah.
Which is not an outlandish thing to say, but still.
Yeah.
That's a fun list too. Last guy on my list is Zakai Ziegler. Because this is kind of the cherry on top of the issue I had with Tennessee all season. Like, this is just, like, every time we talked about Tennessee, I in some way, shape, or form said something to the extent of Zakai Ziegler was the only guy who had any abilities of improvisation when it comes to offense for Tennessee. And like, I've said that so many, like, that, it might be the only thing. It might be first on the list of the things I said the most this year, other than, like, Matt Painter's him. like
And North Carolina is bad.
And North Carolina is bad. He just needed to be on this list for me. It was just kind of the last thing for my issue with Tennessee all season. I thought the pressure that was on Zakai Ziegler and the way that their season ended in an incredibly predictable fashion. And I know that, like, they probably outperformed expectations when it comes to, like, if you told me they were going to go to the Sweet 16 without Zakai Ziegler, I probably would have said, nah, probably not. But they also, like, they got there on their defense, not on their offense. Like, Louisiana and Duke scored a combined 107 points against Tennessee in those first two games. There's probably an argument that their defense got better without Zakai Ziegler on the floor, just because the 5'9" guard is, by definition, a liability. I don't care how good of a defender you are.
When everybody on the team defends anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
When you're 5'9", you're a liability defensively. You just are. And that's so that might have something to do with it, but ultimately they lost a game in which they just were never going to score enough points. And even when the other team got to 60, so they lost. And that was just kind of a thread that ran through my entire season. So he ends up on my list.
Nice.
There you go. Tyler Kolek, Zakai Ziegler, Jalen Pickett, Jaime Jaquez, Ryan Kalkbrenner versus Tyler Kolek, Marquise Noel, Jalen Wilson, Marcus Sasser, and Zach Edey. I think your team probably wins, since you have.
It's also because I put a couple All-Americans in there.
You have well, and in terms of, like, the public first team All-America, 3 of the 5 first team All-Americas.
Yeah,
like the AP first team All. Actually. Yeah. I might have mirrored without even meaning to. I think I mirrored AP first team All America. I think this was first team All America for AP. Sasser, Miller, Wilson, TJD, and Zach Edey. There you go. You got anything else?
We're gonna have to do a portal pod at some point here.
Yes.
The thing I want to say is we talked about this Ed Cooley thing and how quickly this could turn around. Just landed Jaden Epps from Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
Still in the running for Hunter Dickinson. At least it appears. Now I'm seeing other things that says that Dickinson is supposedly leaning toward Maryland. I don't know. All I'm saying is, you get those two guys, we're having a very different conversation about Georgetown next year. And he's already got one of them.
It's truly remarkable, like how fast we've gone from you need to give a coach 4 years to rebuild a program to like now all of a sudden Thad Matta in his first season being horrible at Butler is like a really big red flag. Like, you know what I mean? Like in a season where, and Butler, actually, shouts to Butler. They had a good weekend with the transfer portal.
Right. Well, now the pressure is on that you got to win the portal battles to go make sure your team is good next year. Yeah.
Right. But my point being is that like he rebuilt that roster and then they were bad. And like all of a sudden the conversation isn't really, oh, it's only his first year. It's like, well, it was Jerome Tang's first year. Didn't seem to matter. I mean, like Marquette immediately kind of turned things in the right direction when Shaka Smart got there. And anyways, it's easily one of the 2 or 3 most fascinating things about the transfer portal era for me. Is just how timelines of coaches has completely changed.
Yeah.
The timeline of success,
I
guess. Back to one podcast a week is the other thing, the other programming note. If there needs to be pods, like if emergency things happen on a Tuesday and we're not supposed to record again for another 7 days, like there's not no chance that we won't hop back in for a second pod of a week every once in a while. But the general programming schedule will bring one Jays for Days podcast a week during the off season. But we'll tackle a plan for the off season like we always do, and we'll bring it to you.
Indeed.
Including the hiatus week where we do a soccer and golf questions pod.
Absolutely.
Become an annual tradition on the Jays for Days podcast. Alrighty. We will be back next week, perhaps with a transfer portal thing, perhaps with something else, but we will figure it out before then, and we'll meet you back here in about 7 days. Thank you. Please subscribe to the Jays for Days podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at Jays for Days Pod, YouTube, TikTok, all of those fun things, and we'll be back next week. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the Jays for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh. And we will see you later.